Welcome to Why Knowledge Matters. In this episode, Arvind Sharma joins me to discuss his book, Classical Hindu Thought, published by Oxford University Press in 2008. And joy. Welcome, Arvind. I'm so excited to have you back and you talking about your book published by Oxford University Press in 2008 called Classical Hindu Thought. Now, to start with, give us a broad overview what you try to accomplish with your book.
So, Yannick, Hindu thought has a long history, stretching from at least around 1500 before the Common Era to our own times. And through this long history, various concepts have evolved. Some have been more influential than others, as a result of which, some ideas or concepts have been more influential than others. And they have been interpreted differently in various phases of the history of Hindu thought. So there were two considerations here. First was to identify some of these basic concepts. So that was one concern. And the second was to narrow down the time zone within which we were going to examine these concepts, because they take various forms in various periods of Hindu thought. That explains the word classical in classical Hindu thought. The classical period of Hinduism is usually applied, the term classical in the history of Hindu thought is usually applied to the time period from around 4th century or 400 BCE to around 1000 AD or CE. This was the period in which these concepts acquired their basic configuration. So I thought that because these concepts are so crucial to the evolution of Hindu thought, it would be good to identify some of them which keep recurring, and two, to examine the meaning they have in the classical period, which will then prepare us for looking at the range of connotations they acquired in the history of Hindu thought. So this was the basic goal of the book. So you will find that the book lists these various concepts and goes through them systematically.
Now,
and tries to identify the ideas associated with them in the classical period. This I hope, answers your first question. Your second question, why did I not call Hinduism instead of Hindu and call it Hindu thought rather than just Hinduism? It's because thought is a broader and looser category than an ism. An ism implies some kind of a systematization and some kind of a fixity to that systematization. Given the nature of Hinduism and the nature of thinking in Hinduism, I wanted to avoid that impression. So I called it thought. For the same reason, I did not call it philosophy.
What is still to me interesting is we don't, for example, call Christianism, but we do it when it comes to Hinduism, for example. And usually isms are not always, don't always have a positive connotation, and this was to me kind of an eye opener. And I thought, well, it's really interesting that you made this move actually.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you brought that up.
Now, let's dive a little bit into the chapters. The goal of Hindu thought and Hinduism is really like the search for truth, right?
Truth, yes.
And
yes,
this is
yes.
really put forward. Can you elaborate what this entails when it comes to the lived experience?
Yes, yeah. Okay, thanks. So, see, the basic question is, who are we? Where have we come from? And where are we going? Every religion and culture grapples with these issues. And it comes up with some answers. In the light of those answers, it formulates its philosophical structure. So we have to answer these three questions. Who, according to Hindu thought, are we? Where have we come from? And where are we going? The rest follows from this. Now, the conclusion Hindu thinkers arrived at, or most of them, because Hinduism entertains a number of opinions in this matter. But a body of knowledge, which is roughly regarded as Vedanta, or covered by the term Vedanta, a word which we can discuss later, is the position I have taken in this book, because this is the primary interpretation within the tradition so far. So according to this view of the world, who are we? So according to this perspective, we are jivas, J-I-V-A-S. What is a jiva? A jiva is a living being. We are living beings existing in this world. Where have we come from? We have come from into this existence from a previous existence. So this brings up the idea of karma and rebirth. So we had one idea of jiva, trying to explain who we are. Now we have the idea of karma and rebirth. That is to say, this is not the first time we are existing. We have existed before in this universe as a living being. So the question arises, as we move from that previous existence to this one, what is the mechanism by which we do that? That is called rebirth or reincarnation. We had a body in our previous incarnation. We leave that and acquire a new body. On what basis do we acquire this new body? That the answer to that question brings in the idea of karma. The kind of thoughts, feelings we had in our previous existence, the kind of action we perform. profoundly affect the form of existence we have now. Now, Yanni, this might appear a bit mysterious, but it's not really that mysterious. We are talking now, you and I. We are living today. Huh? We are leading our life today, New Year, talking to each other. How come we happen to be what we are today? Well, we are today what we are because what we were yesterday. So if compare our lives from our existence from one life to another with our existence from one day to the next, and treat our sleep as a form of dying and getting up in the morning as a form of being reborn, you will see what the point, you will see the point which is being made. That you are a part of a continuum, and that governs what you are now. Now the question arises, where are we going? We are going to future births, just as from a previous birth, we came into existence again in the form of this birth. From this birth, we'll move on to another birth. Again, that birth being determined by the kind of thoughts we have, the feelings we entertain, the actions we perform in this life. In the Hindu worldview, and by Hindu I here mean the Vedantic worldview, this is an endless process. Actually, according to Hindu Vedantic thought, it is without beginning and without end. The universe has always been like this. Not static. The universe has always been there in some form and will always be like this. This will be its basic pattern.
But it also gets very specific, and we will go into the details a little bit about karma, samsara, and all these concepts a little bit further on. Now I really want to go back to the very beginning, because this is always the question of Hinduism in this sense, and Hindu thought, really, we should say, is, when did it start? And it's very interesting because there wasn't really a beginning, what I have learned.
Yeah, very good. And so we have the key questions: when does it start and how will it end? Okay. So let us explore these two points of the spectrum. Okay. Now, the Vedantic answer to this question, when did it start, can be examined at two levels. A temporal level in terms of time, and a philosophical level in terms of logic. So let us first look at the explanation in terms of time. In terms of time, Vedanta says that there was never a time when the universe was not. So the question of beginning does not arise. Now one has to be very careful here in understanding this. So I have to now go a bit beyond our immediate concern to say something about the nature of the universe entertained in Vedanta. It's best to proceed now by comparing it with Western thought, by which I mean the thought in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. In these religions, your The universe comes into being at one point in time. And then it comes to an end at another point in time. So the universe has a beginning and it has an end. In the Vedantic conception, it neither has a beginning nor an end. So I'll explain this point. There is a wrinkle to this point, whether it has an end or not. And I'll explain that later. So now, you might say, well, it must have a beginning. Maybe God created it at a point in time. So Vedanta would say, okay, so how could God create it? God must have existed before it. So we'll have to admit. So does God have a beginning? Then we'll have to say, no. Then Hindu thinkers would ask, then what's the problem in assuming that the universe has no beginning? If we are prepared to assume that God has no beginning, why don't we apply the law of parsimony, as they say, economics in thinking? The universe itself has no beginning. In any case, this is the Vedantic view, that the universe has no beginning, but it does not mean that it has always been the way it is now. In the sense that although the universe is eternal, without a beginning and end, there are periods in which it is manifest, like now, and then are periods in which it goes into a state of quiescence, becomes dormant. Again, you can compare it to our life. During the day we are active, at night we go to sleep. We are still alive, but we are into a different phase of existence. Similarly, the universe goes into a different phase, and then just as we awake, the universe also, quote unquote, awakens, becomes manifest, and a whole cycle is completed. So there are these huge cycles discussed in detail in Hinduism and Hindu thought, and they remarkably parallel modern cosmology. They don't tell you exactly, but they are in the same direction. They are very similar, though not the same. A point actually noted by Carl Sagan.
But what is also so interesting, keep going.
Yeah, okay. So we are in a period of this manifestation. This has a beginning, this period of manifestation. But the universe has no beginning. Okay, so this is the temporal description. Logically, the question arises because you will find in Hindu thought that not only does it say that the universe has no beginning, it also says that the jiva has no beginning, you and I, as living beings. They have been always around. And not only does the jiva has no beginning, karma has no beginning. Right? So the same question arises. When the first jiva arises, when did the first karma arise? Hindu thought, that is Hindu Vedantic thought, treats it in the same way as it treats the issue of when did the universe arise or come into being. Same mode of response. But I want to now bring it out to bring out the logical part of it, especially in relation to the jiva and karma. Can you think of a person without any attributes? Can I think of you without any attributes? Can you think of me without any attributes? Perhaps not. Now, I or you here are jiva, and our attributes are our karma. So you cannot really think of karma without a jiva, or a jiva without karma. So if you ask, which came first? You have the chicken and egg issue. So there's a logical problem, according to Hindu Vedantic thought, in positing a beginning to these things. Now you might say, and it has been said, that this is a dodge. You are dodging the issue. After all, karma must begin at some point, and that will explain. That is, Hinduism dodges the issue of when did it all start. But Hindu thought points out that there is an empirical and practical issue to this. Suppose a dollar comes into my hand and I go to the shop in exchange for something I gave to the shopkeeper while he's returning my change. I use that dollar. I have that dollar now, right? I use that dollar to buy something else. Now, am I going to ask the question, when does the dollar first come into circulation? Am I going to take the position? I want to know when this dollar first came to existence before I started using it. And where is this dollar going to end up after I had completed my transaction? We would say this is irrelevant. Right? You have the dollar now, you've made a purchase, you have used it, it is gone. Hindu Vedantic thought promotes the same kind of view in relationship to karma. You have your karma now, deal with it the way you think it's best to, and let go of what is gone.
Yeah, and you mentioned this in the book so beautifully with basically the cards, right? Everyone basically, when we come to life, we get, the cards that we get, but ultimately it's really on us how we play the cards. And so basically our destiny is really in our hands, and it's not somehow written, by no means.
Yes, this doctrine of karma is a very empowering doctrine. That although you may be baffled by what is happening to you now, you may be baffled by what is happening to you now. My God, I'm in such a mess. Things have gone wrong. It is the assurance that all that is happening is ultimately to be traced to the kind of things you have been doing, the kind of thoughts you have been entertaining, the kind of emotions you have been feeling. And therefore, if things can go wrong because of what you have done, things can also go right by the way you do them.
Yeah, that's very powerful. Let's go a little bit more into, how the world, well, it was always a beginning, and that's why Brahma, who is part of the Trinity, who ultimately belongs to Brahman, the supreme power, is considered the architect and not the creator. So as you already said. And then we have Vishnu, who is the sustainer, and then Shiva, basically this destroyer. Please explain us a little bit the three and their meaning, and especially when it comes to Brahma, because there is something very interesting which really made me think, why is that in India today there are basically only, I think, 2 temples who are still named after Brahma.
Yes, very interesting question. Okay, so there are a couple of questions here. So let me take them up one by one. Now we come back to the universe in which we are. The emergence and end of the universe is very much like what we are doing now. We are now in the middle of a universe. That universe, Yannick, was created by you. When you started this session, you were playing the role of Brahma. Now, this session has to run for about an hour. Now you are playing the role of Vishnu to prevent its premature end, because we have to keep it going for an hour. Take care of any disturbance, any problem, preventing any breakdown of any kind. Finally, when the hour ends, you will play the role of Shiva and wrap it all up. So similarly, the universe comes into being. That is its manifestation. And that is governed by Brahma, sets it in motion. While it is in motion, it is regulated by Vishnu, who also, when the need arises, enters into the world to take care of things, to keep them functional. And this is called incarnation or avatar in Hinduism. And finally, like a class or like this session, the universe will end and Shiva will play his role. Now we come to the second question about the worship of Brahma. Hinduism at the present has a lot of followers of Vishnu, and that is called Vaishnavism. It also has a lot of followers of Shiva, and that is called Shaivism. But curiously, it does not have a large number of followers of Brahma. What is even more curious is that at one time, and this is about 800 BCE, it had a large number of followers of Brahma, but not anymore. This is a bit of a mystery. Some people have tried to explain it by saying that now that the universe is functioning, Brahma has no role. He has done his job. But the evidence that he was actually worshipped at one time goes somewhat against this argument. An attempt has been made to answer this in the Hindu text in terms of myths. The myth is that he misbehaved towards his own daughter, Brahma, as a god. And so he was cursed that people will stop worshipping him. So you have a mythical explanation. Some people have suggested that it was Brahma who invites the Buddha to go out and preach. And at a certain point in the history of India, Buddhism and Hinduism became rivals. And at that stage in the development of Hinduism, Hindus might have not taken kindly to the idea that Brahma went out to invite the Buddha. You have this lighter side also in Hindu myth-making. But as I said, it still awaits a proper or properly satisfactory explanation. At least I don't have it.
Now, let's go back a little bit to samsara and karma. And you really, what you say is, it is really the consequence of an action is really not separate from the action itself when it comes to karma. Please explain.
Yeah, see, what it is saying is something very interesting. What it is saying is that although a cause and its effect is temporary, that is in terms of time distinct. I overeat today and I get indigestion tomorrow, right? There's a cause, there's an effect. This distinction between the two is, in a sense, an optical illusion. Brought about by time. The effect is already there in the cause. So if we do bad deeds, the bad consequences of their deed have been set in motion already. One way of putting it would be to say, the past is never past, the present is always present, and the future is already here.
Yeah, and it's, I think, without going into it, but I think that's something also what quantum physics also tells us, to some extent. And, what is really, really so interesting here is that this came up in a time where we didn't have, science in this itself, but that people had those kind of insights is almost beyond belief. And
well, a word of caution here, Yannick. I don't want to take anything away from this fact that in some ways, Hindu thought may be seen as even anticipating science. This has clearly happened in the case of the time dimension. As we discussed earlier, the time horizon entertained in modern physics, modern cosmology. I think Carl Sagan said that Hindu culture is the only one in the world, probably, which has anticipated that. There might be other areas also where, in a sense, I'm not trying to be triumphalist, science will catch up with Hinduism, as it were.
But
as in many ways,
yeah,
Hinduism has had to catch up with science.
Yeah.
But let me point something out, and I think this is very important. Why is this happening? And this will continue to happen. Because Hindu thought does not limit itself to one thought. So because it gives a free play to our intellectual faculties and allows everyone, right, to exercise them as best as they can, with the result that they come up with different conclusions, and none of them is thrown out, because of the nature of Hinduism. It is bound to happen. Because the possibilities are already there in the richness of that thought. And then some of them happen to match modern advances. So what I'm trying to say is basically that the explanation of this coincidence is to be sought not in Hindu triumphalism, but in Hindu pluralism.
Now, I think we could even also argue that precisely what Hindu thought fostered, allowed ultimately this culture of science, emerge in the first place, because as you just said, because of this pluralism, because of this possibility that it allows to occur.
Yeah, I think you've just made a very profound statement, in the sense that the common perception is that Hinduism or Hindu thought is opposed to science. And you are suggesting on the basis of our discussion that the truth might be the opposite, actually. And in some ways, this is a very helpful corrective to the idea that Hinduism is opposed to science. There might be some things in Hinduism which are opposed to science, precisely because it allows all sorts of things to be formulated,
Exactly. And this is really a wonderful, actually, bridge, because you get rid of some of the stereotypes that Hindu thought, and particularly Hinduism, comes with it. And this is really the concept of Varna. But we will actually go this a little bit later, because this is your last chapter, which you really flesh out, well, deeply indulging and in the scriptures of Hindu thought. This is so fascinating, Arvind. It's really powerful. Now let's go to Dharma, chapter 13. And I have to quote this, as I should quote everything that you have written. You say that Dharma without karma is lame, and karma without Dharma is blind.
Yes. Now, this is not an idea with which Western thought is unfamiliar, but not in this form. It's not familiar in this form. The form it takes in Western thought is the relationship between faith and good works. If I were to ask you, should you have faith in Jesus Christ and in God as a Christian, what would you say?
Of course.
Of course. And should we do good things to others? What would you say?
Of course.
Of course. Why? Because faith without works is barren. And works without faith are blind. So this mode of thought has a precedent in Christian thought.
And I mean, Dharma, which really means duty, for example, moral duty. And I mean, it is a huge concept, actually, as you laid out in your book. But it is absolutely essential for us to basically do anything somehow in a way that is appropriate and that allows civilization actually to live together. Because if there is no Dharma, well, there's really nothing that we should do that ought to be good or bad. It simply doesn't matter.
Yes, you see, it is in the sense we get thrown off by the idea that the good or bad nature of a thing doesn't matter. The point is like ostensibly what we are doing may seem to be good or bad. So putting a sharp object into someone's body, is it good or bad? Johnny?
Well, no, of course not. It depends. Well, if you want to do well, if you want to get something out of it, maybe, you know, if you're a doctor, a medical doctor.
Exactly, that's the point.
Yeah.
Now, so the sharp object being put into a body is what a mugger does, right? And what a doctor does. Is the action good or bad? Putting a sharp object in a body. It's neutral.
And that's why the adverb is so important, as you pointed out in your book. So can you elaborate a little bit on the adverb, why it is not just the action, but the intention and how you do the action?
Yes. The doctor is an excellent example. All the actions the doctor does, but for that the intention was therapeutic, to cure the person, could be considered objectionable. Putting a sharp object in the body of someone. Context is so important. Actually, you know, this is a very vexed issue. Actions and their consequences and things like that. And its vexed nature is acknowledged in Hinduism. Though one might say that it tries more than the other religions to explain it in terms of karma and so on. But this relationship is hard to understand, is acknowledged in Western traditions also. There's a very interesting episode in the Quran. There are two figures you might be familiar with. One of them is Moses, and the other is a person called Khizr in Islamic law. He's supposed to be a person who will never die, kind of. Methasullah. And he's a sage-like figure. And Moses approaches him and says that he wants to accompany him on his travels in the world. So Khizr says, you can come with me, but you shall not comment on what I am doing. Okay? This is the condition. So Moses accepts the condition and they set out. Then they come to a village on a bank of a river. And Moses goes to the house of a fisherman and staves his boat. Moses is shocked. But because he has promised he would say nothing, he bites his tongue. They go a little further. They see a young man. And he kills that young man, Moses. Again, Moses wants to object, at least ask for an explanation. But he has promised that he won't comment, so he keeps quiet. They go further to a village where they are treated without respect. When they are leaving the village, there's a dilapidated building. And Moses into that, goes there with Khizra, and Khizra tries to make sure that a certain thing is in order in that right place. This time, Moses cannot take it anymore. And he asks Khizra, you did this, you did this, you did this. What is this? And then Khizra says, now we can no longer go together, but go or move together. But let me explain. First time, I steered the boat of that poor man because I could see that the king's men were about to come and conscript all the boats because the king needed them for an expedition of his. I killed the young man because when he was going to grow up, he was going to lead his parents into evil ways. And I've taken care of this part of the structure in the village, even though they did not treat us well, because a treasure is concealed there, the owner of which is growing up as a young child in this village. So you see this, the enigmatic quality of one's actions, yeah, is illustrated by such accounts in the religious traditions. The almost unfathomable connection between action and effect.
Now,
but before we end though, maybe we should talk a little about the end. We talked about the beginning. We talked about the duration in between. Yeah. Should we?
absolutely, yes, please.
Yeah. So we have an explanation in Vedantic thought of who we are, where we came from, what are we doing here, and how is it all going to end. Now, there are two scenarios of the ending. One is, it goes on, if it is going on. The show goes on. The show must go on. The other is, if you are unhappy with the show, if you want to get out of it, then there are ways of doing this. That is called moksha, or liberation, and what in Western religions is called salvation, getting out of it all. And the way to do that is yoga, on which I hope there is a chapter in the book. Now you might ask, why would one go out of it? Well, there could be two reasons why one wants to get out of this mess, quote unquote, if you are feeling it as such. One is that you encounter great suffering in samsara. Samsara is our existence now. So you feel that you want to get out of it. And many texts in Hinduism and Buddhism and Jainism begin with a person approaching a guru saying, I am burning in this samsara. Show me the way out. And then they start discussing. We might call this the negative approach. The other approach is, you might ask, after living in this world and experiences its highs, basically just as you want to get out of it because of its lows, when you are suffering, you may also, when you experience its highs, begin to feel, is there something more which we can experience as jivas, apart from all this? Something greater than all this. I like to quote here, or I'll paraphrase here a line or a passage from Aldous Huxley. He says at some point, after you have seen Mona Lisa, heard Beethoven, and read Shakespeare, you ask, is this all? Are these all of the good things we are capable of experiencing as a human being? And Vedanta says, well, if you ask that question, then the answer is no, there is more. And what is more, if you have asked that question, you are probably already on the path.
And this is also one of the biggest question is, why do we, and I think in your book, you lay this out, all these conditions, that you have to basically reach, and how you can reach through four paths. One is action, one to yoga, karma yoga. Why is it that we ultimately seek moksha, the liberation, in order to go back basically to the very source? Why is that? Why is this conception? Is this something that...
Okay, Yannick. What are you seeking in life now?
Yeah, I think it's really like the source.
I'm not trying to put you in a spot.
No
I'm
problem.
Just trying to make a point. What am I trying to do in life? So I'm writing books, giving lectures, creating videos like this one through your kindness, right? What am I trying to achieve? Some kind of recognition, right? In my field, right? In a sense, also doing my duty. Okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
Why? Because I think that ultimately this will bring me that elusive thing called happiness, anand, bliss, right? Everything we do, everything literally, is ultimately or proximately concerned with happiness. Then the question arises, what is the most happiness? Where do we get happiness most? Where do we become most happy? And that is where the great religions come in, where Judaism comes in, where Christianity comes in, where Islam comes in, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, Confucianism, Taoism, Shinto, primal religions, all these come in. There is something just beyond the sansar. And that holds the key.
Yeah, that's very powerful. And now let's dive into it, really your longest chapter, where you get rid of the stereotype that Hinduism comes with it, or Hindu thought, I should say. And that's really the caste system. And really, as you said in your book, and I paraphrase, it really, this stereotype and how it is fixed, basically. Well, that's how you're born. It's according to your birth, and therefore you are in this situation. It really denies, according to you, India's religious literature. You know, please explain.
This is, of course, the hardest question of all. The hardest question of all. And there are several reasons for that. One reason is that Hindu thinking in terms of this issue, which broadly called the caste system, has not been the same throughout its history. We can see patterns, and we'll identify them in due course. So this is one factor, great diversity and variety on this issue of social organization within Hinduism. Then there is the colonial interlude, the British rule. And this has made it harder for us to deal with the issue. Because during British rule over India, certain measures were introduced based on a certain understanding, British understanding of what these key social ideas are within Hinduism, which were not quite consistent with it, and so give the whole issue another dimension. And then there's a third factor which complicates all this. And that is, if you will permit me, and I hope I don't offend anybody by saying so, is an almost Western obsession with caste. See, the West seems to imply that there is a Hindu obsession with caste. Now, caste is an important consideration within Hindus. But permit me to say that for a student like me, reach a point in our studies when we find that the West seems to be more obsessed with it than the Hindus. Proof of this. Guess number of books which have been written on the caste system. Any guess?
You ask me?
Yeah.
So what was your question? If I know any book of that has
No,
been
no.
written
How
about-
many books on the caste system, on caste, have been written in European languages?
Well, I think many. I think that's my assumption, but not very positive ones, I guess.
Yeah, but just they have been written right. I believe one figure is 9,000. And this was several years ago. This estimate was made several years ago. And the cottage industry has been running. So if you took a non-entity, right? If you call something Zong Zong, these people have a social organization called Zong Zong, and you wrote 9,000 books on that, it would become a phenomenon. I'm not saying that it is exactly that, but it has elements of that in this obsession. Anyway, I would say that as a warning to those who are listening in to us, that some of the hoopla around it is a bit artificial. However, the issue is a complex one. And you hinted at some of the complexity. Let me try to lay it out as I see it. And this is my view. It's a very complex issue, so people will have different views. I see a clear distinction to be drawn between three terms in this context. One term is varna, V-A-R-N-A, varna. The other is jati, J-A-T-I. And the third is caste, as in C-A-S-T. And these three terms represent three phases, major phases, in the way Hindu society has been organized. So in the first phase, you have Varna. There are 4 Varnas. Varnas are a division of society into functional groups. So there are some people who are priests, who are teachers, who are scholars, who are intellectuals, who are legal experts. This is one class. Then there are people who are warriors, soldiers, politicians, bureaucrats. This is another class. There are people who are agriculturists, artisans, makers of domestic goods, toys, all sorts of things, producers of various products. All these are a class by themselves, called the third Varna. And finally, there is the labor class. They're the people who perform menial jobs like washing, cleaning, scavenging, and so on, who are in service, perform service to others. They are the Shudra class, 4th class. Now you can see that there's a functional division. And what I've tried to demonstrate in this book, which has often been overlooked, is that there was mobility in these classes. Though you could argue credibly that this mobility declined gradually. People could move from one class to the other. So change came about by people changing the membership of the classes. By change in the membership of the classes, not of the classes. Classes remain the same. Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra. Change took place by the membership of these classes changing places. Right? Then we have another concept, and this becomes very important, say, from around the 6th century BC. And that is called jati. Oh, by the way, the word varna is connected with the English word varnish, giving color to something. And one of the meanings of the word varna is literally color. So you can see the connection between varna and varnish. And the second word then is jati, and that is connected with the English word gene or genesis. That is by birth. Now, in this system, society is divided into various jatis or groups, social groups into which you are born, and which determine the group in which you will marry. So we can call that endogamy. The group within which you will have your social life, basically, especially eating, dining, and that is commensality. And people of this group follow a profession, often, a separate profession, and so that they are craft exclusive. So there are only 4 varnas, but later on, there are numerous jatis, various estimates from 2,000 to 4,000 to 8,000, 10,000. Jatis are not fixed in number. The varnas are. Change in varnas took place by the membership changing within the varnas. Change in jatis takes place through jatis by the jatis appearing or disappearing or losing their craft. But the jatis remain the same. What they do might change. But the number can change. So in one case, you have social change with the 4 categories remaining the same, but their composition changes. In the other case, you have composition itself changing with social change. In the occupational front, but mating and eating, yeah? Endogamy and commensality remain connected to the jati. Now come the British. Okay, what is the relationship between these two is an open question. An attempt was made in Hindu sociology to explain the jatis in terms of the varnas by the intermarriage among the varnas, which was not considered the right thing to do, but which happened, and therefore the jatis arose. This is the traditional Indian explanation. What the British did was to insist that just as there is a hierarchy among the varnas, first, second, third, fourth, there has to be a hierarchy among the jatis, 1, 2, 3, 4. And so they set a thing in motion, system in motion, in which various jatis competed in this hierarchical scheme by connecting themselves with one of these 4 varnas, which gave rise to a lot of litigation. And then the British did something else, which neither the varna nor the jati did. The first thing which the British did, it can be connected with varna and jati because they tried to impose the hierarchy of varna onto jatis. But the second thing they did was unique. They connected these things with race, both the varna and the jati. This was not done in the Hindu scheme. The differences were cultural. So this is where we are now. I hope I have not bored you with all this.
No, this is really important, and you bring some very important examples up also when Krishna and I think Arjuna were actually sitting on a mountain and they were discussing it, and there also it hints that it's really not necessarily associated to birth, but really something else.
Yeah, no, this is important because one has to recognize that there was mobility in the Varna system. The mobility in the Varna system consisted of change in membership. The occupational mobility in the Jati system consisted of Jatis undertaking different occupations, but remaining Jatis. This is the tension in the system.
Now, let's go to chapter 21 before we ultimately conclude with the Vedas. And I find it very fascinating how you also said we have to stretch a little bit the definition of books. But first, let's go to wrap our session up to Pura Sartas. And please pronounce the name correctly for me so I can pronounce it correctly in chapter 21. So really, there are 4 goals, and you call it Purusharthas. Or how do you pronounce it?
Yeah. Purusharthas.
Purusharthas.
Yeah. The word Purush means a person, a human being, among other things. Arth means goal. So what are the goals of existence? What are the goals of human existence? This ties in with our question, what are we doing here? You know, where did we come from? Where are we going? What are we doing here? So that is Purusharthas, the goals of human existence. And you will see that it has this division. There are the 3 goals which belong to being in the world. And there is the last goal, which belongs to going beyond the samsara, beyond the world. out of the 4 goals we have.
And they are really dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. And moksha is really the ultimate goal. And
Right.
this is a little bit a personal question, but do you aspire to reach moksha in this life or after this life, I should say?
Okay, very good question. All Hindus aspire for moksha, okay? Ultimately, there is no rush.
But I mean now, in this
Yeah.
life, you have such a beautiful life, and you could say, well, you know what? I would love to enjoy another beautiful ride ahead, you know?
Yeah. Okay, so I'll have to now examine the concept of moksha more carefully. Yeah, it's a very important point which you have raised. Moksha means freedom, literally. So you might ask, freedom from what? So it is freedom from samsara. Freedom for being born again and again in this world, right? Again and again in this samsara. Because we experience both joy and sorrow in this world. But we should distinguish happiness from joy and sorrow. Happiness is beyond joy and sorrow. Okay? So what he's saying is the idea of moksha is you can experience joys and sorrows in the world, good. You can have the joys of the 4 to 3 goals. But if you want real happiness, you have to go for moksha. Now your question is, do I want to seek moksha right now? Do I want moksha right now or not? And my answer to that is we have to re-examine the idea of moksha to come to my answer. When we say this, what we have just said, that moksha is freedom from involvement in samsara, from this world of joys and sorrows into happiness. Yeah? We are making a fundamental assumption. That assumption is, according to Hinduism, Hindu thought, Hindu Vedantic thought, actually even according to Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism, the assumption is that our involvement in this cycle of being born again and again is involuntary. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that although we think that we want something to do, we want to achieve something in life, we have these desires, we want to fulfill them. We have these desires which we want to fulfill, right? The fact is that we do not have desires. The desires have us. Or in Freudian terms, we are victims of repetition compulsion. We are addicted to samsara. Just as you might be addicted to drugs and to lottery, to fame, to whatever. It's an addiction. Once we accept this, then it becomes possible to postulate 2 ways in which you can be in this world. One, you are involuntarily in it, you are addicted to it, which is our condition at the moment. The second is, of course, you can have moksha, but you can also voluntarily opt for being within this cycle. And this is what, according to Hinduism and Buddhism, the great sages do. The great figures of their religion do. Okay.
Therefore, the question is very legit,
So
to
the
ask
question
you
is,
this, because I think you are one of these.
yeah. Now, see, this is the idea behind the bodhisattvas in Buddhism. People who are also ready even to postpone their own enlightenment to do good to others. That's one extreme. Or who, even after they have achieved enlightenment, continue to help people. People like Ramakrishna in Hinduism, who has openly said that he will come again. There are hints of that even in Ramana Maharshi. So for them, this is a show. Something to which we are addicted is for them a playhouse. So it's an acted drama of some kind. So what I would like to see myself doing is to reach that point where one can make this choice.
Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah, I can't. Yeah, that's really exciting. Thank you so much for this explanation. Really personal account too. Now, let's wrap it up with the Vedas, chapter 22. And really, it's the oldest religion in the world, and therefore many things. And I think Homi Baba also mentioned it in his book, the location of culture, that there's nothing independently that evolves. By the very fact we observe something in other culture, it already influences our own, and therefore our actions. And I think the Vedas are a perfect example of this. Can you dive a little bit further into the Vedas and its significance for really what we all have now with all the diversity of religions in this world?
Okay. So you might then want to ask, where is all this coming from? I'm telling you. Did I make it up? One evening, having nothing else to do and having all these ideas from various religions, I just cooked this up, this worldview. Yeah. So the answer to that is no. Although it is coming to you through me, it is not by me. It is in the Vedas. The seed form of the key ideas, which we discussed, are to be found in the Vedas. You may say, where in the Vedas? Because Vedas is a huge book. In fact, it's a library. So we will have to say in the latter portions of the Vedas, especially in the last portion. The last portion is called the Upanishads. Because it is the last portion, it is also called Vedanta. Ved, these are the texts. Ant means the last portion. Vedanta is the doctrines propounded in the last portions of the Veda are called Vedanta. That's what we have been discussing. Now, I want to make an important point about this. They are considered revelation. The Vedas are considered revelation. Just as the Quran is the revealed word of God, just as the Bible is revelation in Christianity, the revealed book in Christianity. Hindus treat the Vedas as revelation. But one must keep this in mind, that in Hindu thought, in Hinduism, only that is really revelation, which is revealing, not just revealed. That is, unless the revelation becomes revealing, it is meaningless. Unless the Bible actually inspires our life, Revelation is a book. Unless the Quran inspires your life, it's a book, a revelation. When you start leading your life according to it, it becomes revealing. Same with the Vedas. And this point is made a number of times in Hindu thought that the books, the mere reading of books, the mere memorizing of books, the mere repetition of books, the mere recitation of books is of no use. They have to become a living force in your life.
Arvind, this was such a fascinating book and discussion with you. And what I find very profound is, while reading your book, is that it opens whole new possibilities to which, I myself, see the world. And the comparison that you make, with the Bible, with Islam, with Buddhism, and so on, are incredibly revealing and tell us so much about the richness of this this thought that is really literally considered the oldest religion of our world, and that we, I think, really own very, very much. So inspiring, deeply inspiring. And thank you so much, Arvind. It's always a pleasure and profound listening to you.
Thanks for inviting me.
Arvind Sharma.